Chinese began their discussion of energy by talking about post-oil. Of course there will be a post-oil world. But in this country, our focus, in the Congress, your focus is on the next election. In the business world, your focus is too frequently on the next quarterly report. And if we have a Scarlett O'Hara kind of attitude, we'll worry about that tomorrow. Gone. That's the way with Scarlett O'Hara, I'll worry about that tomorrow.
What about wind turbines?
Oh, I'm a big fan of all of the alternatives. And I drive through West Virginia, and out in the West, I've seen pictures. I haven't been there, and you can see them, hundreds of them for miles. And there is no way you will get energy or use energy without some environmental impact. Any way you get energy is going to be an environmental impact. You're taking the top off the mountains to get coal. You're putting all the CO2 and soot in the air when you burn the coal. When you have the wind machines up, if you aren't careful and keep them out of flyways and stuff, the birds may be flying into them and bats may be flying into them. There's just no way you're going to get or use any form of energy without some environmental impact. And the challenge, of course, is just rationalize. We kind of feel we got to have energy. For thousands of years, they didn't have it. It was their muscle power, scavenging for food and stuff. But thank God we don't have to do that anymore. We just have to have a rational accommodation of the concerns for the environment and the need for additional energy. With the wind machines, I think they're beautiful. My wife thinks they're beautiful. Some people think that's the ugliest thing they ever saw. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Depends on what you see, depends on where you sit in many of these things. But it's one way of producing energy. Very cheap energy, by the way. The Danes, the Danes are probably the most advanced nation in this. And they're producing it for as little as, a couple of cents a kilowatt hour for these huge wind machines. Coming here today, there were 2 trucks that had these. Wow, how big are they? You see these big, and they 50, 60 feet long, and probably 12 feet across. They had to have the car in front of it and the car behind it.
And they say each section costs $1 million.
Conceivable. And it took a lot of energy. Now, I don't know how, an interesting question is how long do you have to run the wind machine to get back all the fossil fuel energy it took to build the wind machine?
That's what you
and I asked, and I don't get an answer to that.
I'll give you that assignment as a school teacher. That is your job to find out that answer.
Any discussion of wind machines, you need to know that. And I had a similar question for the nuclear power plant. They are big. They're pouring, thousands of cubic yards of concrete. How long do you have to use the nuclear power plant before you get back all the fossil fuel energy it took to build a nuclear power plant? And one of the obvious considerations is that at some point, when we have gone through enough of our fossil fuels, there will not be enough readily available, high-quality fossil fuels remaining to do 2 things simultaneously: to continue our economies and make the huge energy investment we're going to need to make in alternatives. Am I right? You can't wait. I'm the greenest Republican on Capitol Hill, but that's not a very steep hill to climb. Yeah, and I just, and I guess it's because I'm a scientist and a farmer, and it just seems, these things seem to me to be pretty fundamental and pretty axiomatic. Other questions or comments? Okay. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Mike McKay.
Yes, sir.
2 things. First, as a clarification, if I'm not mistaken, you do travel back home to Frederick County each day.
I do.
Okay, so you actually are in Western Maryland.
Yes.
You live in Western Maryland in Frederick County. Anyhow, that being one thing. Second of all, sir, I tend to believe that the problem with Washington is that we don't send statesmen down there. We unfortunately are sending people from one side of the extreme of the team, and we send one side of the extreme for the other team. And they don't go down there and say, for the good of the country, we're going to solve a particular problem. You took a lot of bashing for sitting next to Nancy Pelosi, and I believe the second year came around, and there's a story behind that. How do we fix that problem, sir? How do we get more statesmen to go down and not depending on the letter behind their name, but yet look at the problem and try to fix it for America. Do you have any suggestions for us?
When you mentioned statesman, I was thinking of one definition I heard of a statesman, that it's somebody who can tell you to go to hell and make you anxious to get started. Yeah, I did get some heat from sitting with Nancy Pelosi. You know, my first degree was in theology, where I learned to love the sinner and hate the sin. And so I like some people on the other side of the aisle whose political philosophy is just, these people are not evil, they're just wrong. They genuinely believe, you know, they want exactly the same thing we want. They want safe streets, they want good schools, they want good jobs with adequate pay, they want a military big enough to protect our country. But they think we get there through bigger and more controlling federal government. And they genuinely believe that government makes better decisions than people make. They genuinely believe government spends money more wisely than people spend money. So the more they love you, the more they tax you, and the more they regulate you. Because that's what government does for your good. I think that's dead wrong. But you know, the best way to change, and I can, gee, I will tell you this. I was talking to one of our, I won't tell you who the leader was. I was talking to one of our leaders who couldn't get an appointment for 2 years to talk to Nancy Pelosi. And, you know, I can go talk to Nancy Pelosi anytime I want to. And I just about, I said, you know, it's hard to get an appointment to go talk to her when you've just told the world that she's the village idiot. And that's kind of what we do down there, don't we? And if you watch what we do, and you almost never see me there. And if I'm there, I'm not talking about how dumb the other side is. We do 1 minute at the beginning of the day. And most of those 1 minutes are telling the world how stupid the other side is. You know, we agree on most things across the aisle. And if I have a wonderful relationship with my wife, but it wouldn't be that good if every morning we got up and the only things we talked about were those few things we disagree about, right? And that's what we do in the Congress. We start the day by talking about those things we disagree about, you know. Just not a good way to start a dialogue. Yeah, you know, when Steny Hoyer, he told me, I talked to several people who said, yeah, that is true. Steny said, when anybody mentions Roscoe Bartlett, he tells them Roscoe is my friend. He's still trying to get his friend out of office and put a Democrat in. That's just, I don't take any of that personal, by the way. That's just Washington. Yeah. Other questions or comments?
Right here, Carson.
Yes, okay.
I'm a senior in high school, and so next year I'm going to be going to college. And the cost of college is a pretty big issue for me. So, what do you think about like how education is going in this country, and like the cost of education and how it's looking to be going?
You know, every household in our country has had a household less than high school education costs us $8 million. Obviously, we ought to be educating our people, shouldn't we? There's a huge disconnect in our education system. In K through 12, we bring up the rear. A poll a few years ago, we were thankful for Cyprus and Sri Lanka. Out of 21 countries, they were the only ones where the kids did worse than ours. Compared to almost any industrialized nation, our kids bring up the rear. And yet, when it comes to our universities, we're the envy of the world. And they like, what in the heck happens between the 12th grade and the 13th grade? What happens? You know, you need to stop and think about that. You know, why are we doing so poorly in K through 12 and so well in higher education? There's one pretty obvious difference, and that is there is keen competition in higher education. You're not mandated to go to any one school. For most students, there is zero competition for K through 12. There may be other things too, but at least that's one difference, isn't it? You know, I think that competition always makes, no matter how good a job you're doing, if you have to, you probably can do a bit better job, do you think? And competition always makes things better, more efficient, cheaper. And I just would like to see, but certainly without destroying, because our public school education is one of the wonders of the world. We have such a huge percentage of our kids they don't get educated very well, but they all go there, right? So we don't want to remove that opportunity for kids, but we need to look at what we can do to, it's not that we aren't spending enough money. And by the way, tell me if this is true or not. I just heard Martin O'Malley brag that for 5 years in a row, Maryland was the top education state in the country. And what I heard was that tell me if this is right, that survey was on the basis of how willing they were to put more money in education. Not how well the kids did, but how willing they were to put more money in education, as if putting more money there makes schools. You're shaking your head.
I'm shaking my head.
You don't think more money makes schools better necessarily?
No, I don't.
No.
I don't.
No, I taught for 20 years.
Maryland has been #1. Now, I'm not too sure how they measured it. I've never heard the money in it before, but I assume that it was measured because of testing and things like that, but I don't know the answer.
I don't know. If you know the answer to that, email us, give us a shout, because I haven't heard.
It's the testing,
yes.
It's the test?
And we are #1. Maryland has been #1 for
okay.
what, 5 years? Yes.
Well, Maryland may be #1, but you know, we're #1 among the people at the end of the pack if you're in a marathon, because our kids.
But, okay, let's look at our education system, and this is just my opinion. I think the Europeans have a better system than we do, and I think we need to redo ours. These young men and women are sitting here. They are going 12 years to school. By the time they are finished their 10th grade, they're ready to start into what they think they want to do. We waste 2 years, junior and senior. Then we send them to college and make them repeat things that they don't have to have. We waste 4 years. The young sir, men, go for Pell Grants, go for anything that you can, but go and get. It's out there. Believe me, I've educated 5 kids, I know. And not only that, they had to go through school with me teaching them. Most of the people in here know me, so
Mom's a teacher
I'm
too.
sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, I taught all 5 of my kids plus 3 of my grandchildren.
Yep.
And I have 5 great-grandchildren.
5 great, well, wonderful. Okay, well,
Yes.
I need to catch up. My mother was my teacher for several years, and those were the toughest years.
Oh, I know that.
She was a tough teacher.
It's eligible for
And my mother was my teacher for 5 years.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Other questions, comments? Okay.
For 5 through college.
Yes.
How likely do you think it is that a compromise can be reached by the end of the year on the expiration of the tax cut? All the tax cuts and tax changes that are going to expire?
You know, I honestly don't know. What I think we probably will do, since we are not responsible, what I think we will probably do is just kick this can down the road and say, let's talk about this for another 6 months or so. You have got to come to grips with this deficit problem, and kicking the can down the road is not going to be helpful. I went to Nancy Pelosi and I wanted to talk with her about this impasse where, as you pointed out, the Republicans are dug in, they're not going to increase taxes. The Democrats are dug in, they're not going to have any meaningful cuts in programs unless we have fairness, which in their view is more taxes for the rich people. And I said, Nancy, we could have an increase in tax revenues without an increase in the tax burden, because the tax burden is made up of 2 things. It's made up of the tax revenues and the compliance costs. The compliance cost is the lawyers and the accountants that we hire, and it's about $200 billion a year we spend on compliance with the current code. So if we had a tax system that had 0 compliance costs, we could have $200 billion more revenues without any increase in the tax burden. Taxes don't go up. The tax burden, which is the tax revenues, the taxes you pay, plus the cost of complying with it. And they said, well, gee, how do you do that? And I said, well, first of all, you're going to need a system which is a progressive system, because nobody's going to buy a system which collects this money from. By the way, the lower 50% of taxpayers pay 2.9% of our taxes. The top 1% of income earners pay 42% of our taxes. And that says, well, what would that kind of a tax system be? And I said, well, if you have a flat tax on consumption, and you don't tax the things that poor people need. Some people call it the fair tax, and they want to have a $28,000 debit card. The first $28,000 worth of purchases I make, I give them the card and I don't pay a tax. And Warren Buffett doesn't need a debit card. I don't need a debit card, but there are a lot of people who do. See, I just like that's a big bureaucracy. Gee, I lost my debit card. Oh, here's another one. Now I have 2 debit cards. Isn't that nice? I can see all kinds of opportunities for mischief in a big bureaucracy to make sure this thing works. I just like to not tax the things that poor people need, like a used Chevrolet, or like work clothes. This is not work clothes, thank you. And this gets taxed. I wouldn't tax potatoes. I think I'd probably tax potato chips. I wouldn't tax fruit juice. I think I'd probably tax sodas. I kind of cringe at the idea that you could use taxes to affect some behavior modification, but if you've got to collect taxes anyhow, you may as well try and do some good with it while you're collecting them. This would get us over there. I talked to John Boehner about this. Nancy asked me to talk to her tax